I'd been struggling with the sermon I intended to preach and for which the service was prepared. I finally realized I was completely preoccupied with, well, certainly the Kavanaugh hearings, but mostly the state of women's hearts and souls and minds. For many women this week, there have been times recounting stories we've shared only very judiciously. For others, there have been the spilling of tales we've never shared with anyone. Stories that are ancient in our lives and deeply imprinted on our psyches and in some cases, our bodies. I resisted preaching on this. There is much that is personal for me in both the telling of the tales and in the listening. I try hard not to preach about things that are too deeply personal because it's hard to make meaning when you're holding on for dear life. Do I suspect that there will be things I'll miss in this? Yes. I'm not going to talk about my stories. Exhale. It may be that we want to hold an event, maybe an interfaith event, where women can talk. I've talked to Nina about this possibility, but that service is not this one. If there are women who want to talk, I am here for you. I know that there are others. For those of you who fear that your story is too much to hear, to ask anyone to listen to, I remind you that however upsetting the story, what you have endured, we can bear witness to. Instead, today I'm going to talk about the pain of holding silence and a society that permits egregious acts against, right now, in this paragraph, I'll say women, and then silences their truth. Sexual violence against women and children is common. I'm not going to parse the statistics because that opens us up to the opportunity like, oh, well, yes, but someone else says this, or, oh, well, it's only that many. But sexual violence against women and children is common. It doesn't matter how many. Sadistic sexism is the privilege of the ruling class, and in this case, that is mostly white men of power. This week, I deliberately posted on my Facebook page about things that had happened to me, and I have so far been very lucky compared to many women I know. Some assault, some harassment, a little casual disregard, and some job discrimination. The responses were phenomenal. Women from the age of 19 to 84 told stories on my page. And then they went on and told stories on their page, and then they went on. Some of those stories had never been told before. The women had always been fearful they'd never be believed. They had been afraid of telling even their most dearly beloved, in some cases protecting them from the horrors or fearing to see their loved ones' view of them change and see them as something broken. Or a blind panic that even loved ones would either disbelieve them or think that they should have been able to protect themselves. This week, when all this horror burst onto the front pages and Dr. Blasey Ford was disbelieved and castigated, scientific articles poured forth. And you know, these were not studies that were done in the 2 days between her announcing what was going on, what had happened to her, and where these studies came from. So the article said, here's why you tell, here's why you don't. Here's what you remember, here's what you don't. People have been studying this for years, but no one's been interested. How much did these women matter? One of the most powerful witnesses for truth that I saw of how and when we choose to recount these torturous acts was Charles Blow, the columnist who spoke on Chris Cuomo's show. He was a childhood victim of sexual violence, and he speaks movingly of his process of coming to be able to talk to this, how few people he felt he could trust with the tale, before he realized that he needed to trust himself and tell the truth, and that there was no wholeness for him or healing without that. Now, for many women, there is at least some hope that Dr. Blasey was mostly believed, and that they might be as well. But for many of us, the reality remains that our truth makes no difference, that assaulting a woman doesn't disqualify you from, well, as we look around, almost anything. It may not be true, but for women it feels as if, when the news about the Catholic Church has finally begun to break open again, that the male victims are believed, that their lives matter. Let's be clear, they haven't for a long time. And no financial lollipop that they might receive is going to make this history any easier or any sweeter. You live in New York, you know a lot of Catholic men. I knew fewer growing up, but if you look at the roster of PA priests, there were plenty in this area charged with assaults. So we probably know a lot of Catholic men and women with stories to tell. Stories of incidents that blighted and stunted their lives. Sexual assault steals huge pieces of your life and your confidence. And if we don't stop it, we're colluding in that theft. Perhaps not as effectively or actively as the religious hierarchy, but concluding nonetheless. Don't do this, don't do that, don't wear this or that, don't go out alone, don't go out at night, don't be alone with men. We live in a world that tells people how to behave so as not to be raped, rather than telling men not to rape. Because as the chart tells us, thank you, Karen, rapists are pretty much 100% responsible for all rapes. Victims are responsible for none. And as my friend Alexandria would say, there is no rapeable offense. There is nothing that you can do that makes rape appropriate. It is an uneasy truth that it is likely that all of us know men who have raped, assaulted, or harassed women, or girls, or gay men, or transgenders. We live in a culture that permits these things. I have had a lot of people in the midst of my making space for women ask me what I'm going to do to help men heal in this process. Right now, women are in crisis. They're bleeding out, and that's where I'll put my efforts. And I largely think that this is a culture shift that men must lobby for, particularly men in my age cohort. I will support people like the husband of a young woman I met the other day who's working in a jail program with young men who have been molesters. He's doing amazing work. I can support him, be grateful to him. But I think that women need to know that the rest of the men are willing to do the work on our culture. We don't need to be empowered. You need to empower yourself to make this difference. It's scary out there right now. And scarier, far scarier for others than for me, because I do have comfort. This is a warm and loving UU congregation. I know you're horrified. I trust you to love us enough to consider undertaking this work. Bill Staten comes back in December. You may want to get together and talk some of this through. As June Jordan says, you are the ones we've been waiting for. It's going to be an uncomfortable time. And women are ready at this point to share that discomfort. Women are enraged. How could we not be? We do hold up half the sky. We need the recognition and respect from you. And we need, and I forget, is it Angela Grimke that Ruth Bader Ginsburg quotes and says, what women need from men is for you to take your foot off our necks. I think it's Grimke. It's one of the abolitionists. and suffragettes. We need other men policed. We need the culture shifted. So do you. And I'll tell you, do you know how many men are in prison for sexual assault? Young men who were molesters. They're there because we don't care enough to stop this so they don't repeat the culture. We need the women need the culture shifted. The men need the culture shifted. The benefits accrue to all of us when these things change. And I know the men are no more sanguine about what's happening in our government than we are. As Susan Frederick Gray said at GA, this is no time for a casual faith. There's too much at stake. We must become deliberately better UUs. I hope that we can move through the rage. I think that only happens as things begin to change, but it's death dealing to live with this much rage. It's horrible to keep things in your gorge. As Martha Nussbaum said in the Washington Post the other day, talking about the fear-laced backlash against Dr. Blasey, how can women combat this onslaught? And she also was talking, in this case she was talking too about the rage that has risen up at women's daring to say this, and what we saw as the male response, a lot of male response to Dr. Blasey's testimony. How can women combat this onslaught of fear-driven rage? Ford gave an example with courage, dignity, and truth. I believe that if we have the courage, we will ultimately prevail and reshape our society. And in the meantime, thanks to quite a few people here at UUCSV, and particularly Sarah, that we have OWL. We're growing totally different young people, and we're teaching them to be agents, or to be leaders and change agents. I feel confident that our kids will not be committing even unconscious acts of violence against women. But that's the lowest of bars. I also have confidence that they will speak up about, interrupt, not only violent sexism, but also the common everyday variety that keeps women and girls marginalized and underappreciated and self-conscious and unconfident. One of the things that Sarah and I have looked at as we've gone through our readings this summer and planned the year ahead is that everything is interwoven. And those of us with privilege have to come to terms with this. I'll repost the Robin DiAngelo article on white frailty. Whether we're looking at class, racism, sexism, poverty, we all have mirrors we have to look into. And we won't be excited about what we see. But we're in good company, and the change happens when we look in that mirror. When we do, maybe we need to have another Yom Kippur, which we've just gone through, and read again the Roberts Isaac Eller piece that says, we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. And my men, it's not just you. Women have internalized this. One of the sobering aspects of this situation for me is how long it took me to stop blaming myself for even casual harassment, and by extension blaming other women. We take this in and we let it poison us, and things fall out of our brain, even if we manage to keep them from falling out of our mouths. I'm sure there are times that many of us have judged women rather than listened and believed, or shrugged a shoulder and said, it's just the way it is. You have to learn to put up with it. You'll have to learn to go back to that list of don't do this, don't do that. If there's any hope I hold in this depressing time, it is that we, all of us, will say, enough is enough, no more. It's that women won't permit this anymore, and that our beloved men will rise up with us, because none of us have any idea how rich and beautiful a world this could be without that. By and large, Europe has made this shift, although as the anti-immigration movement gains traction, women and their rights are threatened. Immigrant women first, and then the rest of us. And that's one of the things about going back to, we'd all like to pull these things out and look at them. Let's look at class, let's look at race, let's look at all of these things, but they're all completely interwoven. And so when you start down one road, it's really easy to start down the next. I have no bow tie on this sermon, no way to neaten it up. These are uncomfortable times, and there's no easy way out, no quick fix, no cheap grace. Cheap grace is done. Look at the statistics sometime and think about our congregation, our adults, our kids. And although we know that as sexual harasser, what is his name? Prairie Home Companion. All you kids are above average. But our kids are every kid. They're in just as much danger, especially if they're not here. And every kid deserves to be safe. Safe from gun violence, safe from sexual violence, safe from racial violence, safe from class violence. Every woman deserves this. Every transgender person, every gay man, every person of color, every man who might be straight but isn't heteronormative, as they say these days, cisgender. None of us need to carry the weight of this alone. Life is hard enough. We must be good enough to make it different. We must be strong enough to stay the course, because it is a long and painful one. There's a Women's March on January 19th in Washington. I know that Sarah and I will be there. We were writing about it last night and this morning. You might want to come with us. Maybe we should go with our interfaith colleagues. I know that Nina preached on this on Friday. I'm sure that other people we know will be preaching today or hearing this same message or one like it. I believe that we, our little congregation and our larger denomination, will be part of the change that happens in this world. Because we are community and we care enough about each other to do what is just. Because we believe in the worth and dignity of every person. And for me, because I believe the women. For me, because I am one of those women, and I refuse to have other women initiated into these ranks. It is nothing no one needs. For me, and for many of us, because we believe in peace. And there is no peace without this change. As the song says, we've come too far to turn back now. Glory land lies ahead, not back. We're not making America great again, but we can make it great. For UUs, heaven happens right here on earth. May we make it so. Blessed be.